All right, guys, back again. I am in the middle of doing the brakes. As you can see, I've got one corner done. My organization of brakes is along the floor, but I did find all the parts that I need to do brakes. But when I was getting ready to do the second corner, I had everything cleaned out, and my buddy Joe, who's actually going to help me today, reminded me that I should look at the state of the bearings. And there's a little bit of play there, which isn't too bad. A little bit of radial play, a little bit of lateral play, about 60 thousandths. So I'm gonna check the bearings there. But I came back to this side and there's a whole lot more play, like 3/8 of an inch. So before I go any further on the brakes, I'm gonna investigate, see what's going on there. Best case scenario, it's a bearing set that needs to be replaced. Worst case, I don't know what the worst case is. But also, interestingly, when I took the wheels off, I noticed what I originally thought was kind of like a rust flake, but that's a crack, which you can see really well on that side. So that back wheel over there, going around a turn, I'm sure was moving back and forth and starting that crack. So it is really a good thing. We're gonna dig into this and see what we can find. All right, so Joe and I have gone through this a little bit more. It does look like the bearing is intact there. It's just wanting to ride pretty far in. And we've looked at the layout there, and we can actually see in the differential, this axle shaft is sliding back and forth here. And I think what's supposed to prevent it from sliding out is this bearing and this bearing retainer here. So we are draining the differential here. We've taken the drive shaft out and we're gonna start cracking into that thing and see if we can see anything. This is the kind that doesn't have a diff coupler on the back. It's more like a Ford 9-inch. So we're gonna start disassembling here and see if we can find the issue. Okay, it's been a couple days since we've been out here and have come up with a plan. Both myself and Joe have been looking around to figure out if we can get any details of what might be happening, but as you can see here, the bearing is intact and it rotates, but there is nothing keeping the axle all the way out. So I do have a slide hammer that I'm going to use to attach to the end of the shaft and try to pull this thing out of here, get that outer race out. So I have the original nut, and then I have the same, which I think is a 7/16 14, sorry, 7/8 14, and a 5/8 something that came with it. I'm gonna weld those two together, try to pull that out. And then that should allow us to take the whole differential chunk out and see what's actually going on there. So I'm gonna weld up the adapter, try to pull this thing out, and then I'm probably gonna need someone to help me get that whole thing out. All right, we'll let that cool down for a little bit. Woo, that's hot. So we'll get that up on the axle attached to the slide hammer and see if we can unseat this outer race and pull the whole half axle out. All right, we'll give it some more heat. Let's see if we can get this guy out of here. There we go. Doesn't look like any damage there. Yeah, a little space constrained here. I'll figure it out. I got both axles out, and we're gonna see if this is a one-person job to take basically the differential chunk out. I do have a platform right underneath that I can rest it on. Yep. All right, guys, I got the differential out and on the bench here along with the axles just to mock it up. I very quickly see what the problem was. And I do think in some ways I dodged a bullet because it didn't explode, but it probably would have soon. And I actually truly think that this may have been the reason why that truck was sidelined and put away decades ago. But first, this is a differential here, which is very, very cool, purely mechanical, and it does two main things. One, it takes the drive shaft, which actually attaches here, it takes that rotation and it transfers it in two directions, one way and the other. So it's like a right angle transfer, and it does that so it can spin the axle, spin the hub, spin the wheels, and you can actually go forward. The other cool thing it does is it allows both wheels to spin at different speeds or spin at different angular velocities. And the reason why that really matters is if you're going around a turn, one of the wheels needs to spin a little bit faster than the other. And if you didn't have this, you'd end up kind of skidding one of the tires and wearing one of the tires. So that's very cool that it does that, and this has been in existence for a while, and there's been a ton of improvements over the years, limited slip differentials, etc. But this is about as basic as it comes. So I'm going to try to set up the camera real quick so you can see it. I'm not going to go into great detail. There's a ton of YouTube really cool videos to explain how they were developed and how they run, but while it's out on the bench, I might as well just run through it real quick. So the first thing I can demonstrate is just turning the drive shaft. And that turns the ring gear, the main ring gear. It turns this middle kind of yoke that holds the spider gears in there, and both axles turn. Nothing kind of special there, although it's still kind of cool that it's changing the angle of rotation. The other thing I can try to demonstrate is holding one shaft still and still turning, and you can see those spider gears inside start to work. Not working very smoothly here, but I can turn one side, the side that's farther away from me, and holding the other side stationary. So all that's done actually obviously very fast and pretty smoothly when it's working correctly. It's very, very cool mechanical stuff that's built into these. So now what's going on? Why is this one not working? Well, if you remember, the symptom was one of these axles was sliding in back and forth like a half of an inch. And I figured out what was going on. There's actually supposed to be a slug that wraps around that middle shaft there that keeps both shafts from moving back and forth. Well, that piece had split into two, one was still kind of intact there. The other was in the bottom of the case I just dug out, and definitely kicked around in a couple places and damaged some gears and whatnot. And so that's what allowed the one of the axles to move back and forth. As a result, keep rotating it around, you can see a crack that's starting to form. That makes sense because it just kept slamming back and forth, and we saw that on the wheel. The wheel was cracked. We could actually see inside the fender there was rubbing there. So I'm actually pretty sure that this is probably was or is a ticking time bomb. So if I didn't do it now, it would have exploded at some point. What am I gonna do? There's a couple options. I could try to find the parts to replace it, which I think is a long shot. Two is upgrade the whole axle to something else, or upgrade the differentials to something else. But I've already got a lead on one, if not two, L110 axles that I might try to put in its place. Of course, I got to make sure those axles are good before I do all that work, but I just got all the brake stuff going, which, by the way, is a lot of these parts here that I got to get back together. So I am going to probably go stock axle, get it back in there, and just keep plugging away. And I'm not going to wait for the axle to do that. I got plenty of work that I can do to get the brakes going and whatnot. So stay tuned. Next episode will be brakes. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This one definitely feels like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But I'm glad that I found it. I'm glad that I paid attention to it, dug into it, because if not, this thing would have exploded. And it could have been catastrophic driving down the road, not driving down the highway, but driving down the road. If the rear end locked up or something, that probably would have not been good. So yeah, gonna figure out how to get a new axle or new parts back there soon, continue to work on the brakes, and get this thing on the road as soon as we possibly can. So thanks for tuning in for another episode. Even though it doesn't really seem like it, I'm making tons of progress, and stay tuned for the next episode.